Another mango story. I like to tell stories. I picked up the brown paper bag that lay on the Morris chair. Well, old timers will remember the Morris chair. The Morris chair we had to polish at Christmas time. Polish so that our faces would glow in the shine on the Morris chair. So I picked up the brown paper bag and I began to stuff it with mangoes. I selected two Ceylon mangoes, the mango rose, too starchy, we call it starch mangoes, and I threw in a beef for good measure, in case it was not enough. Because when I suck in mangoes, boy, I ain't easy, you know. The beef mango would satisfy anyone. Yes, we sometimes called it a bellyful mango. It was like the big fruit, like the grapefruit, called it jug jug. Florida and St. John used to have a lot of jug jug. You had one jug jug and you were ready to go. I slipped on my bathing pants and I headed for the nearby Grandans Beach, carrying the mango bag. Well, I took the little shortcut near the spot where the Silver Sands Hotel once stood. That's the old Silver Sands Hotel. Now I often use the steps there to dust off the sand from my feet after my sea bath. It was early morning and the air was fresh. The unmistakable scent of seaweed filled the air. I spotted a koki oko tree at the far end of the beach. A number of beautifully adorned seashells lined the sandy shore. They looked so attractive lying on the sand. One peek at the shells and Mother Nature's unmatched craftsmanship became evident. The shells were obviously pushed to the shore by the waves that splashed throughout the night. There were all types of shells, shells the tourists love, and they were often seen on the covers of specially made spice baskets and ornaments the vendors sold to the visitors. I carefully chose some of the shells and placed them in the brown paper bag. After picking up a little spot for the bag, I nestled myself between the roots of a mangeline tree. Now I'll tell you something about the mangeline tree, and there were many of them on Pandy Beach also. We used to say mangeline. It's spelled Mancheel. And that's a dangerous tree. And it bears a small green fruit that is poisonous. It looks appealing to the eye. Yes, like a small apple, but a milky substance that oozes from it is known to blister the skin, and many people knew it could even cause blindness. Be careful with that tree. There were stories of tourists who mistakenly took the fruit for an edible delight and subsequently paid the price for their ignorance. Nevertheless, it was my habit to sit beneath the mangeline tree and relax before taking a header or belly flop even in the water. I used to sit under the mangeline tree and study for the GCE examinations when I went to St. John's Christian Secondary School. But on that occasion, I sat and I looked at the sand crabs as they darted. The sand crabs darted in and out of their holes. Some came close to me and they stood motionless with their gondis, we call it the gondis, the claw. They stood there and observed me. One slight motion and they all scampered off. See, animals, they're not like people. You threaten them or you look threatening and they're gone, they're gone. I looked as some of the sand crabs struggled when they were caught in the waves. They anchored their legs in the sand for support until the waves retreated. I stared at them as they cleaned their eyes. I love looking at the sand crabs. Sometimes I picked them up and held them in my hands. Well, I never took a chance with the big land crabs, those that live in these holes, or even the little reddish ones. They used to have a lot of little reddish crabs. We used to call them Tululu crabs. They used to run along the Lagoon Road area, now called Karani James Boulevard, passed by Glean's Jetty. There was a jetty there, Glean's Jetty, and on the area there close to the road, all those little Tululu used to be running around. Yes, the area we once called the Mang. It looks quite different today. The big land crab were the ones Grenadians used for making the crab back. When last you had a crab back, eh? Now, great patience was needed to remove the meaty parts. The meaty parts, it takes some time. You need patience for that. Nowadays, a lot of people are not patient. They go and buy Kentucky Fried Chicken and all that stuff. No time to do all these things that cooking food that or preparing food that calls for a lot of patience. But I'll tell you this. When one sat down to devour the meal served in the same back of the crab, well, the taste buds rejoiced. I remember we had a big bag, we used to call it a crocus bag, but we used to short up and change up everything else. So some people used to call it a cocos bag. But we had a big bag filled with land crabs in our kitchen. Somehow, they all escaped. But we managed to catch a few, and of course to run from some of them. We had caught them in Wester Hall. Wester Hall one rainy night. When the heavy rains flooded their holes, they all came out. And sometimes we took a flashlight, we say searchlight, and shine the light right into their eyes, and like Manaku, they just stand up. They stopped in the track just like the Manaku. We then picked them up with care. No one wanted his or her finger to be caught in the crab's little gondi. Little gondi? Boy, you gotta watch that one. The big gondi might harmlessly span your wrist, depending on the size. But a little gondi, the little claw, man, that was always sure to connect with a finger. There were a few brave souls who used to push their hands deep into the crab holes and pull out the crabs. Well, they had a way of doing that, eh? I never tried it. I knew a fella from River Road, but he often did that. I still shudder when I reflect on the thought. As I sat and stared at the sand crabs, I wondered why so many creatures were afraid of the human, or afraid of people. I used to see birds perch themselves on top of the backs of cows in woodlands, Happy Hill and Woburn. But I'm yet to see a wild bird do the same on a person's back. Well, of course, if the person trained the bird, that could happen. It is a truism that monkey know which tree to climb, and the sand crabs often run away as soon as someone appeared. I looked at a bag of mangoes and I debated whether I should first bathe first, and then eat them, or wash them in the seawater and begin to savor the taste. Well, a popular calypso that we used to sing had the words, when it comes to eating, when you come to eating, when you eat like a Viking. Well, I tell you, that is exactly what I did to mangoes. When I ate mangoes, I ate like a Viking. But I go easy these days, grown and getting older, you have to be careful. Now, a number of black ants had crawled into the bag. I took out the mangoes and dusted the bag before packing it into another bag and putting them in another spot close to the tree. Well, I did not have the stomach of a guy in Brooklyn that used to eat anything, eh? And if ants was on the mango, he probably eat that too. Then I headed for the water. I took my hand while I was in the water and I touched the water because we often did that. I made the sign of the cross, a custom that I grew up with. I wonder if people still do that when you go into the seawater, make a sign of the cross. We used to do that. I don't know if that's one of the customs that faded with time. So I made a sign of the cross. But I stood there and I realized the water was cold. And whenever that was the case, I'll stand there and make all kind of simmy-dimmy, jumping around, passing my hands in the water again, but was reluctant to plunge in. I learned later, in fact, I had a different approach as the years went by. I just, instead of making all this simmy-dimmy and wondering about the water, cold or not, I just jumped right in. That's what I did later on in life, but just jump in. Right. But at that particular time, I spent time touching the water and just staying there. There were times I even tasted the water, but I dreaded the coldness on my back. So I stood there and making myself all kind of foolishness, making a papi show, a kunomuno of myself in the seawater. Luckily, there were not anyone around to see me making a fool of myself. Well, then it was time to take a header, boy. Yeah. I had played around too long. And that didn't work for my advantage, and you'll know why very soon. A big man as me, boy, I should not be afraid of cold water. So I just dive in, and I stayed below, holding my breath for some time. I love doing that. I moved slowly along the bottom of the water, and then I came up, and I made a little dog swim. What we used to call a dog swim. Yeah, we had all kind of fancy terms, dog swim. And I wondered in my mind, I said, what the hell, why I wasted all that time? Yes, I wasted all that energy making a bully of myself before taking that dive into the water. Yes, I looked in the direction of the tree where I'd put the brown paper bag containing the mangoes and the shells. You know the bag was gone? While I in the water and making a happy show of myself, somebody here was actually looking at me. And the mangoes were gone. The bag was gone. Well, then I knew for sure why animals do not trust humans. Anthony Wendell Dirk just share it with you a mango story. And that picture there of the crab, the sand crab. See it ready for action, boy. Ready. God bless.